Hello, I'm Chris Flisher, and welcome to Turning of the Wheel, an intelligent, lively discussion on astrology, art, and adventure. Timing is everything, and as the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed. Join me as I explore the current planetary alignments and offer insights for coping with change. Educational, informative, enlightening, the Turning of the Wheel is a welcome pause in your daily swirl of constant change. Through intelligent discourse, inspired guests, and educational segments, I will help to enlighten your knowledge of astrology and guide you to accept change as the great wheel of life turns. Call in with your questions and speak with some of the greatest visionaries in the time-tested practice of astrology. Turning of the Wheel, Astrology, Art, and Adventure with Chris Flisher, each Saturday live, 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific, on Contact Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Turning of the Wheel. My name is Chris Flisher. This is a show about astrology, art, and spiritual adventure. And our adventure today is going to be one that takes us into the cosmos. And we're going to be looking at the great cosmic wheel, which I think of as the universe, is sort of in a progression and in a way which makes us appear to see to the outside world as if we're in the midst of a gyroscope. Sort of the universal clock that we all appear to be a part of is very similar in some ways to the workings of a gyroscope, where you've got all these different things happening at different times, and it's sort of a wonderful synergy that is existing there. My guest is going to be on in a few minutes, and we'll be talking about this fascinating topic with him. Michael Elliot is of the Sabian Assembly, and we'll be talking with him in a few minutes. I want to make a few announcements first, if I could, though. I'm not sure if anybody really realizes this, but this is a donation-based radio show. In other words, I survive on the goodwill of those of you who listen. So if you feel it in your heart somewhere that you can gain something from this listening to this radio show, or you can feel it anyway, then certainly there's a way to help me out by going to my website or checking on the donation box on my newsletters. This is how I survive. I'm kind of like NPR in that regard, but I don't kill you with lots of, giveaways and begging for money. I try to keep it quiet, but I do have to make that known somehow, that I do survive on the donations and the goodwill of people to keep this radio show going. I've been on for 6 years now, and hopefully I can keep it going for longer, but I do need your help sometimes. I want you to know that I also do professional readings for anyone who's interested. I have a list of things that are available on my website. You simply go to www.chrisflisher.com, and you'll be able to see everything that's on there, as well as what I offer in the way of readings for people. They're very accurate. People use them all the time. They especially are useful for things like, kids graduating from colleges, marriages, births, all of those things, all major life events, as well as just getting your pulse taken about where you are in your life as well. I also have a free newsletter that goes out every Sunday evening at 5:30, and so that when you get to work on Monday morning, you can open it up and read the astrology for the week to come. I'm encouraging you to read not only your sun sign, but also read your rising sign. The rising sign is a critical piece of who you are in your chart. When you know that, and it could oftentimes be different. Oftentimes it is different from your sun sign. When you read those two signs together in the weekly report, you'll have 85% accuracy of what's going to be happening in your week. So that is exciting and well worth looking into. Those are all free. Anyway, without any further delay here, let's get Michael on. Michael Elliot is from the Sabian Assembly, and we're going to be talking about, he's a student of Mark Edmund Jones. Now, you've heard me speak about Mark Edmund Jones in the past and the Sabian symbols. He certainly is a monumental person in the history of modern contemporary metaphysical thinking, as well as astrology in particular. And Michael is very adept at his techniques, and many of his techniques set the stage for how we interpret charts going forward, how astrology works, and brings us great insight into this process. And we're going to be talking about what I would call the cosmic gyroscope, as I referred to earlier. It's sort of the way this gigantic clock with all these different swirling cycles of planets fits into our universe, as well as we're going to be talking about the current mundane aspects of what's going on in the world today. When I refer to the word mundane in astrology, it simply means sort of the mass global cultural movements that we see. So as society, as a species, as we evolve forward, we see all kinds of different things happening, and we have to look at the planetary influence and how that helps us move forward. So all of this is part of our topic today. So without any further rambling on here, let me welcome Michael Elliot of the Sabian Assembly to the show today. Michael, welcome to Turning of the Wheel.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for having me on. It's a delightful day here in Maine.
Yes.
And I don't know. I don't think you could live in a better place. Maybe parts of New England like where you are, but yeah, no. And
well, when the weather's good, it's good. When it's bad, it's not always that much fun.
Yeah, exactly. And
but that's okay. So, we have to have that contrast in life. Without the good, we don't enjoy without the bad, we don't enjoy the good. So, if every day was beautiful, we certainly wouldn't enjoy it. So, as I mentioned in my introduction to you, when we look at astrology more than any other divination tool, really deals with the repetitive nature of cycles. As cycles come and go, as they come back and they come back, and so we see this, and they're all in their own little world in different patterns. Mercury's moving fast around, and Saturn is moving at a much slower pace. But when they all click together, we have significant events which we call mundane events, and we've seen that recently over the past years. Now we are in what's considered to be a very cardinal moment right now. We have Uranus in Aries, we have Pluto in Capricorn. We've had a lot of activity with Mars moving through Libra.
Right.
Very caustic, very unsettling period over the last several weeks with the shootings in Colorado. Very much of a Mars-Pluto kind of a incendiary kind of event. And we have lots of activity happening, and these aspects are critical. And I'm just wondering what you think about it all and what we're sort of seeing in the near future coming up. What do you see?
Well, you started the program talking about the gyroscope or the gyroscopic activity that astrology kind of brings to the table. The gyroscope is a fascinating image because it creates stability. The faster you spin it, the more stable it becomes. You see, when a gyroscope starts to lose its momentum, it'll start to wobble and then eventually fall down. So if you keep it spinning, it gains strength. And we live in a closed system. We're in a world where all of these events are all linked together, especially in the 21st century. You know immediately what's going on. You know what kind of gyroscopic activity is most relevant in your life. And you can see things destabilizing, and you hope that through astrology you can find stability for your own self and your family.
Well, if nothing else, at least you can. I think what it does is it allows you to understand that even if there is a little bit of instability and turmoil in your life, that it is temporary and that it can be explained. So in some ways, astrology does provide a benchmark for, or at least for an explanation for where you are. If you're going through a difficult transit, for example, that might explain certainly the churn that you might be feeling in your daily life, so to speak.
Right. And those difficult periods are opportunities.
They are, totally. People need to realize that, yeah.
And that, again, is where the gyroscope comes in, because I like to use the word gyroscopic crystallization. So you'll find something in your life that you call difficult, but it's simply a time where you need to spin that gyroscope a little bit more and speed up. I don't say speed up in the sense that you're going to get reckless, but you need to quicken your daily activity in some way. And
they really serve as reminders. They serve as reminders, don't they? They're kind of like a wake-up call.
Right, exactly. Now you can do that a very simple level with just your sun sign, and like you like to use a rising sign, which is not a planet, but it measures the daily circle, which is another kind of gyroscope. The cycles that you go through with the whole horoscope, you've got 10 planets that you can look at, and each one of those planets represents a little gyroscope in your life.
Yeah.
So when you're moving through your life, you've got a lot of opportunities, and you just have to know the flavor, the almost like, I use keywords, and so your purpose in life is your sun. You can measure that week to week. They can click onto your website and get that quick little recipe. So there's a crystallization. It's a little paragraph, a couple of sentences, and people can understand something. And
it's interesting too, because each of those planets bring a certain sort of a different characteristic. They bring a different flavor, which sort of rounds out our portfolio of our personality.
Yeah, and so now if you want to move into a larger dimension, you might want to get a little more sophisticated. You have your chart done, which is a quick freeze of the whole cosmos, basically, and then it has all those little planetary cycles working as gyroscopes that you can see with your eye on one piece of paper. The one that I'm kind of fascinated with right now is where you take the two circles. The first circle is the daily motion of the Earth on its axis, and the other one is a long circle that we call the year, and that's where the sun. Actually, we're in a system where you replace the sun and the moon and the Earth, so that we are geocentric. But it's that big circle, that yearly circle, that we call the seasons.
Right, which is so apropos. I mean, it's that cyclical piece. So we do know that we're going to have. There's some element of predictability. We know that the angle of the sun across the face of the planet, of our planet, is going to be different. We know that the lighting is going to change as time goes on. So we have some of these things that are predictable. But when we bring in other elements, we bring in other planets more specifically, they also tend to color our experiences and our evolution as well. This is where the mundane quality comes in. When we look at what we see in the world, when we look back to times where we see similar cycles, we can see similar types of events begin to occur. You know, the financial crisis that we're in right now in the United States and in the world is very similar to a time that was felt about 84 years ago during the First Depression. Very similar alignments. So there's real value to understanding these cycles.
Yeah, and the astrology that I do, one of the first things we look at is the leader of the country. Whether it's a king or a premier or a United States president. We like to look at that, and instead of freezing his chart, which is important, doing that quick freeze, making that horoscope. You have that, but then in addition to that, you've got those two circles. And when you look at the two circles now, you're looking at something that isn't frozen anymore.
That's right. Dynamic. It's more of a dynamic chart.
It's a dynamic chart, or it's almost like a timetable. And,
right. Timetable, like a snapshot, a current snapshot of where things are in the world.
Right. And so, let's say we extrapolate that timetable out from. Let's say President Obama, and that timetable gives us points where that gyroscopic crystallization for the country. He now becomes the country. He's the United States for that 4 years or that 8 years until he has to step out of office. And so the leader of the country really is the country for that period. You can look at the chart of the country, but looking at the actual living human being who's in charge is a lot more relevant.
Yeah, and they sort of become representative of, they are sort of the physical, visible, tangible representation of who we are at the time. So they really do take on that sort of personality. And it's important because he is an interesting character. When we look at his chart, the chart of President Obama and the upcoming election, we see quite a bit of interest there. There's quite a bit of things, and of course the election will be happening under a Mercury retrograde in November, which is kind of interesting. We don't know what that's going to entail, especially it's kind of worrisome if you ask me, because as we enter into a world of electronic voting, I have certain, pause about what's going to happen.
Yeah, that's all hard to say. I heard one astrologer give a talk recently, and they said, well, there's danger of looking at the national chart. I believe there's going to be some kind of danger here in July, possibly an assassination attempt. And of course, what looks like what really happened was that incident in Aurora, Colorado. So
right.
That's where you have difficulties, because you cannot give an actual name to what's going to happen, and when you look at those broad generalities.
That is tough, and people ask me about that all the time. But I think if we know that the potential is there, we simply have to be mindful. Fate is going to go its way, and we nearly have to sort of go along the stream with it.
Yeah. So to get more specific, we want to take that chart for the president, and actually, what I started to do today was take his chart and then Mitt Romney's chart. And look at this more dynamic side. In other words, I'm not looking at the wheel as much as I'm looking at this timetable and trying to see where any crystallization points might occur. And now, to get more specific, I like to call this a fulcrum. So it's almost like you can you have a leader or you are an individual. It doesn't matter. It could be in your own personal life, and you have something that comes along where you can actually move things, your circumstances, in a way you hadn't been able to do that. You've got that opportunity to do something. It might be a little, less comfortable than normal. You might have to move a little faster or a little more consistently, and you might need to be a little more focused. But lo and behold, when the dust is settled, you've accomplished something you thought you never could do.
Right.
So that's kind of what I looked at in general about what's going on with those two people, with those two individuals, the president and his opposition.
And it's interesting because, I think what people inherently probably know, and the way astrology addresses this is that if we are faced with challenges, we are faced with difficult aspects, but those, as you mentioned, are great opportunities for growth. And so, if things were going along swimmingly and, there never was any upset or turmoil in your life, you would just sort of sit along there and plod along, and not much would happen. It's when you have these difficult things that you have to rise to, these challenges, that you really find growth. So this happens in the country as well, and we're sort of at that time right now, aren't we?
Yeah, we're at that point, and people have a great deal of discomfort around the economy, for example. You have a president who has put certain things in place. The opposition doesn't like that methodology. And so now you've got two parties going at each other over something which usually wins the election. Usually, if you look at what most pundits say about politics, that people vote their pocketbook.
Yes.
So you start to see these things at work, and what I found fascinating was that President Obama is smack dab in the middle of a lot of these opportunities right at this point in time, and that this will carry through in his individual life. And this will carry through into the election and beyond. It'll be quite an interesting phenomena if people wake up to the fact that you've got someone who does have the potential to turn a corner with the presidency. Not so clear with the opposition, and I'm not talking about whether I lean one way or the other, but those opportunities aren't there. So it's more like the old party line versus the president with a lot of potential. It doesn't mean he'll succeed. It just means it's there for him to grasp a hold of.
Right. Yeah. This is what I think is important for people to understand. So some of the outcome may be out of our hands due to the retrograde of Mercury or electronic voting, as happened, and any other number of things that can certainly muddy the waters. But from a potential standpoint, he does have far more. I think his aspects favor that potential far more than the opposition, simply because of the fact that he is primed, and he's already turned that corner in some way by just being who he is. He certainly is a historical character, where if given the opportunity to continue, can really, I think do quite well. I think he's just beginning to hit his stride, really.
Yeah, I had a friend. He passed away over a year ago, and he has a little website, and he wrote a whole piece. He called it "The Age of Obama," and and he could turn out to be an important figure. Again, this period with these and these opportunities are called squares. A lot of times, astrologers will talk about squares being difficult, and it's not the difficulty that's the issue. It's the opportunity that comes along, and I know from my own personal life, whenever a square comes along, I look forward to it because the difficulty takes a back seat. It's anything worthwhile has its its sharp edges. It's not going to be a comfortable ride all the way, but getting through that and looking back is probably one of the better feelings you can have as a human being.
Mm-hmm. And I think that one of the most valuable takeaways from that is really that it's the tension. It's the tension. It's sort of what I always think of as the great overwhelming force, which I would often think of as maybe perhaps Saturn as sort of that accountability. But it's the ability to adhere to your responsibilities, adhere to rise to the challenges that you're faced with. It's what builds the character. It's what moves you forward. It's what gives you. It deepens your outlook on life and your experience on life and your education on life. I mean, it certainly brings a whole new realm of depth to it that you would not have gotten if you had just been sitting on the sofa watching TV all day.
Yeah, exactly. The first. Crystal, I'll call them squares now, and I'll actually refer to the fulcrum idea, was in the spring, early spring, for Obama, and the whole idea revolved around one of concern, okay? So it was a Saturn at work with his ability to move forward with the, actually it's literally Mars squaring Saturn, and moving forward with an opportunity with great concern. He knew the election was coming, and he knew he'd done his homework, but he was taking, he's being nibbled around the edges by the Republicans as far as all the things that weren't ideal for the country. Mm-hmm. I think that the Republican Party probably has to wake up to the fact that the economy is probably going to be pretty good under him. It may even get better with this second square, which is Venus, and that's realization. He's going to start to apply some of the realizations that he's put together for the country over the last 4 years.
And those are important because they really do address the largest bulk of the population, which is the middle class. I mean, sort of the programs he's put in place, or he's talking about putting in place, are very similar to the kinds of events and programs that Roosevelt had put in place under similar skies. This is where I find it to be fascinating because we are in a time where the middle class is being squeezed, and they are the ones that are bearing the brunt of many mistakes on the heels of the large banking industries and invading foreign countries. Lots of things that have gone awry over the last 2 decades have now come down and landed on the plate of the middle class, and they're really being squeezed. So I think some of his programs really do address that area, which is the mass populace, and we have to keep that in mind.
Oh yeah. Now those are 2 of the 4 major areas that you will find when you look at this timetable. There's the sun. Is your drive, your natural drive. The Mercury is your basic attitude. Venus is basic sensitivity. That's your achievement. And then the opportunity is Mars. So we have 2 of the 4 being activated at this right as the election gets geared up.
Yeah, my experience has always been that it does require more than one aspect. That one aspect is good; it does signal the event likelihood, but it's more often when you get 2 or 3 lining up at the same time that the events are more likely to happen.
Right, exactly. Now, what confirms that is I always like to look at the big picture, and then go to the moon, which is the fastest moving body And sometimes it's it's sort of like the second hand of a watch. It's moving off the seconds, or in this case, it's moving much faster than any of the other planets. But you can see it spend 2 years in a house, so 2.5 to 2.5. So what will happen is it'll when he was elected, it crossed an angle. An angle means there's a major change in the person's life. Well, literally, you become elected president. That's pretty big change, and that was right on the money with the moon. And halfway through his first term, that moon entered the second house, which is the house of resources. So you could see the whole focus being, well, you're not doing so well, and we're not happy with the economy. So the Republicans take over the House of Representatives. So now you have a little more of a dynamic balance going on. But what's interesting is that these two squares allow him to work out of that second house for the next couple of years, and really work with the resources that are at hand. He's going to have a trine right about, and I'm not sure when the convention is for the Democrats, but he'll have a trine to the sun in early mid-August, and then a quintile. So he's going to have this more impersonal way of dealing with things. He won't have to, he'll be, of course he's going to be the Democratic candidate, and he's going to be able to go forward with this trine momentum briefly through the election. It is, like I say, this is a very quick sort of thing. And then with the larger opportunities from the two squares that he had in the early spring and the early summer, there's a huge potential for the country.
Yeah, it certainly is fascinating. We're talking today with Michael Elliot. He's of the Sabian Assembly. You've heard me speak about the Sabian Assembly before. It's representative in the Sabian symbols, which is the work of Mark Edmund Jones. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back in about 2.5 minutes to continue our discussion. And so hang in there, please. We'll be back in about 2.5 minutes, so just hang in there, and we're going to continue our conversation.
What is your destiny? Where are you going? What is your real purpose? Do you know? Do you want to know? Of course you do. It's your duty to yourself. We are all here for a reason, and we all have great potential. Discover all of this and more with a professional astrology reading. My name is Chris Flisher, and I can help you. Discover your strengths and work on your weaknesses, and live your life to its fullest capacity. Based on your birthday, birthplace, and birth time, an authentic astrology reading will allow you to live your life to the fullest and reveal your true purpose. Only real astrology can give you real information. It is your destiny, and it is your path. Write me at chris@chrisflisher.com and book a reading today. Or call me, 978-264-0668. That's 978-264-0668. www.chrisflisher.com. As the world shrinks and our barriers come down, diverse cultures are striving for harmony, balance, and peace. To ease the transition, we need to expand with color, light, and tolerance. Now, you can become a global citizen and embrace the color and clear spirit with the divine artwork of the mandala. Mandalas are a timeless artistic offering for creating unity, harmony, and peace. My name is Chris Flisher, and I've spent years creating mandalas, and they are now available online at www.chrisflisher.com. Come and experience the world of color, form, and function with t-shirts, coffee mugs, note cards, and limited edition prints. These vibrant, lively paintings and products express optimism, oneness, and spiritual balance for all who use them. At www.chrisflisher.com. www.chrisflisher.com and enter a world of possibility and color.
In astrology, the sun and moon represent the masculine and feminine principles, while Aries and Libra represent the axis of relationships. Tune in when Chris Flisher and his Aries sun go head-to-head with Deborah Clement and her Libra moon about a subject near and dear to everyone's heart. Relationships. Will the ram run roughshod over a wiltering Libra moon, or will the moon's sweet powers of persuasion stop the Aries beast in his tracks? To find out, tune in to a very special presentation of He Says, She Says Astrology with Chris Flisher and Deborah Clement on Turning of the Wheel at 8 a.m. Pacific, 11 a.m. Eastern, right here on Contact Talk Radio. He Says, She Says Astrology every fourth Saturday of the month on Chris Flisher's Turning of the Wheel.
Everyone, welcome back to Turning of the Wheel. My name is Chris Flisher. This is a show about astrology, art, and spiritual adventure. And our adventure today is taking us on a journey through the Cosmic Gyroscope, as we refer to, and that is sort of a metaphor for the way that the planets and astrology can provide balance for us. As Michael, my guest of the Sabian Assembly, mentioned earlier in the conversation, we're on this giant swirling planet that's zipping through the universe at the same time as it's spinning around its axis. And this sort of spinning action is representative of a cyclical nature. And astrology is the study of cycles and repetitive cycles. And we see these sort of line up in a very mathematical, sort of scientific way. But beneath all that, there's great relevance, great intelligence, great synergy that can be derived from the cycle. So the cycles and the way they swirl do provide a sense of balance, and that's why that terminology and that visual of the gyroscope is so accurate. And we're talking about the upcoming year and how sort of this cosmic gyroscope is swirling and what we could expect to see. Now, we've been talking about the election, and Michael, you had made some astute comments about, how the president at the time really does represent the state of the nation, so to speak, sort of the snapshot of where we are today. We can always use the Sibley chart, which I frequently use, but the Sibley chart is based on sort of the country as a whole and might have more grander, historical relevance as opposed to the current themes that the presidents might bring to the table. Yeah. And so when we look at the election coming forward, and of course this summer, we see quite a lot of activity. We've had a lot of cardinal activity, and we are wondering if we're turning a corner. And I certainly have my own opinions about that, but I'm wondering how you feel about that. Well,
I think, again, I'm seeing a scenario unfold around Obama, and I will give a little more attention to Romney as well, maybe to close things out. But Obama has got these things lining up in his secondary. We call these secondary progressions. Right. Basically, they tie right into those two circles: the daily circle and then the yearly circle that we call the seasons. And when you combine that, the individual chart now gets unfrozen. It starts to take on a timetable with a more dynamic aspect to it, and basically it's a year for a day in the what they call an ephemeris. So you look at that little schedule, and for example, if a person is born, let's say you call yourself an early, like I am, an early Taurus, so I get to be a Gemini by the time I'm let's say 30 years old, if I'm the very first degree of Taurus, if I'm right in Taurus at the very beginning. So when I'm 30, I get to be a whole new sign. So basically the year for the day works for all the planets. They move at different rates, but each one has that gyroscopic crystallization to it where you have an opportunity to do things along the line of each planet. Mars, and again, I focus on the Sun, obviously, but then Mercury, Venus, and Mars to give us the real structure to the life, to how the life. So when we look at that chart for Barack Obama, let's look at the dates for November 6th, 2012, which would be the election date.
we do see significant activity. We see his sun in the 8th house. We see Mars in the 9th house. We see Jupiter and Saturn very closely aligned. They're only 6 degrees apart, and they're in his 1st house, which would, to me, indicate a very favorable aspect for him, simply because as an ego, the Saturn on the ego does lend a certain sobriety to him, and I would call him a fairly sober kind of individual just by his nature. But I think when you add Jupiter there, there's a sense of responsibility that he has to complete a task, I think, and the task is certainly kind of there, and that sort of leads into what you were saying earlier.
Well, the Jupiter is fascinating because 2 years ago, the midterm election wasn't so good for his party, but it also was a station of his natal Jupiter, which again, it's on that timetable. So in December, right after those elections, he got to re-grasp his whole identity. That's what Jupiter in the chart, and here we call it consistency. When it actually stations in the chart on that timetable, the secondary timetable, gives you a chance to kind of re-grasp who you are. And he'd been president for 2 years, and he had the opportunity to he had the challenge of dealing with a House that was Republican, and now he had the challenge of saying, okay, who am I as president? And
that's that was a very necessary step for him, because it was one thing for him to be elected as he was and to set that historical precedent. He also won the Nobel Peace Prize right at that time, so he accomplished quite a bit in his first year or so, very quickly. But then people actually wanted him to sort of say, okay, well, you've gotten all these accolades, what have you really done? And that's where the challenge came from.
Right. And of course the opposition Republican Party will hammer away at, what have you done to me? What have you done for me? Excuse me, the slip there. And so what can you do? Well, the best thing you can do is go back and really ask who am I? You don't have to be a hermit to do that. You can do it while functioning as president. And now you see the challenges kind of coming to the fore. And also going into that second house, the resources. How do I deal with the resources that this country has, and really make them work? The election coming up will be on the tail end. He'll be finished with these squares. He actually finished up at the end of June, and now it's all a matter of consolidating that. Interesting who he's running against, which is someone who. People identify him with, a guy who knows how to run a business, but then what came out today, was the fact that everybody is favoring Obama for his handling of foreign affairs. And I think what will happen is that with this with the lunar progressions, it'll be actually Obama who's going to be able to get a better handle on the resources of the country.
Well, in some ways, he has his record to fall back on. I mean, he did solve many problems. He got us out of Iraq. He got Osama bin Laden. He solved many world problems he has had to be faced with. He had to deal with Libya. These are major international conflicts where he had to actually step into the fold and do this. Mitt Romney doesn't really have any experience on that international stage at all. He has been able to, run a business successfully, which is his whole claim to fame. But then again, you have to stop and say, what was the modus operandi of the business? Well, the modus operandi of the business was to make a profit, and that profit came at the cost of people losing jobs in this country. So you have to ask yourself, where do we all come out of this? You're going to bring those jobs back now?
Yeah. And now, of course, a lot of the stuff, and if I just look at I'll go to the big four. I'll call them the big four now in that timetable. But before I go there, I just noticed that his progressed moon will go into the 12th house, starting in December, and the 12th house is, of course, all the things that have kind of been pushed aside. You hear things about where he's channeling his money, big write-up in Vanity Fair about where the money lives. Where he's been keeping.
This is sort of a time. This is when the skeletons come out of the closet, I think, don't you?
Yeah. Exactly. And so we have that, and that's on a superficial level here because it is the moon. But the timetable again says, if he did get elected president, we might have we might be very distracted from what the country needs. We have a president who's under fire for the way he dealt with his integrity and his finances.
And you see, at the end of the day, that really does say a lot. There's not much that you can. At the end of the day, it's those personal steps that really define the character. I heard some comedian the other day make some wisecrack about how they were going to, how the spin masters are able to take something good and turn it into something bad. And the comment they were making about Barack was that he's having an affair with the White House gardener, which I thought was pretty funny because that's Michelle Obama. And there's very, very little that you can make fun of or bring down about him because he really is. He is what he is. I mean, you do get the impression that he's a loving father, a caring concern, and that he has the country's best interests at heart. I do really believe that. I don't feel as if there's any ego-driven sort of agenda here. I think he just really wants to fix things, whereas I don't quite get that impression from the other party. Yeah,
exactly. And the thing about the big four, the Sun, Mercury, Venus, and Mars, in Mitt Romney's chart, is he's not really faced with any of these fulcrum, I call them opportunities, squares, during this period of time. And a lot of people say, well, it's smooth sailing. Well, smooth sailing can maybe carry you in the wrong direction, the last thing he really had going was back when he was, and I'm not sure of the dates here. You're from Massachusetts, but back in 2005 was the last time he had a real challenge to deal with. And I'm not sure, was he governor then at that time?
Yeah, I don't know, but your comment about smooth sailing is really right in the money because I think what happens and that's a great little metaphor because I think when things are easy and going along swimmingly, and you're on full tilt, then you certainly get surprised sometimes, and those surprises kind of throw you because you enter into a state where you're going along, things are going along, and all of a sudden smooth sailing turns into rough seas, and then you've got to learn to adapt to that. And so that really does not bode as well. You want to be on your best game. You really want to be, down in the ninth inning and trying to come back.
Yeah, exactly. And those squares, again, you've got this fulcrum. Why not use it? It's a challenge to use it, to get it in place, maybe get the right, positioning. But once you do, boy, you can move mountains, almost literally. I'm really putting together a talk on the presidency and using some of these techniques. And I want to look at Truman in particular because Truman ran against this guy Dewey, who looked like he was going to sail right into the White House. Everybody had him. He'd won. They actually printed a headline that said Dewey wins.
I remember that. Yeah,
of course, it won. And I'd be fascinated to do this secondary progression technique on Truman and Dewey, and see how many squares are going on and were going on in Truman's life at that time in 1948. And what happened was you got a president now who's duly elected because he came in as vice president when Roosevelt died, and now he could make an alliance with Eisenhower's fascinating stuff out about Eisenhower and Truman working together to rebuild the world after World War II. Mm-hmm. Again, you bring the astrology in, and bingo, they have a very strong planetary tie. So you can see these opportunities opening up not just for that individual, but for the whole world. Because you're able to create a structure that can carry the world pretty much conflict-free. The Cold War, of course, had its moments, but the world wars disappeared. That was the end of a period of great conflict in history.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think when you look back at that time, it was Eisenhower who warned the United States to beware of the military-industrial complex, which we just marched right ahead into anyway. Yes,
and you have a sub-period there where they're very close. Eisenhower was in constant contact with Truman, and then Eisenhower went over to the Republicans. He sort of was a straddler as far as politics went, and then he kept that stability going because I think in a lot of ways because of his relationship with President Truman. And then when he left office, he was able to give us that kind of visionary statement about the way things could end up, how we could end up.
Well, I think he saw very clearly that there was profit to be made through the use of the war. And where before that we had always entered into, because if we look at historically, World War II in some ways gave a lot of people work. It employed a lot of people, the Rosie the Riveter, everybody was all in the boatyards building Liberty ships and building all this stuff they put a lot of people to work. And I think that large manufacturing saw the connection between, prosperity and war, and they sort of got there and became a war salesman, for lack of a better word,
Yeah, exactly. So getting to the present, we're seeing a possibility for someone to come in and restabilize things. He's had 4 years, and these squares now open the door for the whole country. It isn't just for him to be president. It has to do with the whole country being able to turn a corner and move things in a different way. It's hard to say. The propaganda machines are working on both sides, and that could cause more heat than light, of course. But we're seeing this.
Well, that is a concern. Yeah, that is a concern, and I think that this has to be. I would hope. I mean, we only can hope for so much, but we want to see. We want to see this, in some ways, this tension is good, because if the tension is there, we will then be able to sort of creak over the finish line and maybe get through this tight area where the momentum we have built will continue. It's really important to keep that momentum going. I always find it to be so disruptive to change, because it really does take a president, a certain amount of time to hit his stride, and then it almost appears as if he's hitting his stride and that it's taken away. I mean, maybe we need to rethink the length of term, the length of office that they're in, or something like that. But there does seem to be a piece of that, don't you think?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. And the interesting little within these secondary timetables, they're like sub periods. It's like you take a train, let's say you're going to go to San Francisco from Boston, but you happen to stop off for maybe 2 weeks in Minneapolis. And it's almost exactly like that. You take a long trip, but you have these little sub-excursions or little places you want to visit. And that's exactly what's going on in the most important area, which is your basic attitude. So let's just say we've got Obama. His basic attitude colors the whole kind of like cultural climate in a way. The president.
It does. It certainly does, and I think he's elevated it to a point where he sees it as he sees the historical relevance of where we are. It's not just about it's not just about maybe putting out fires necessarily. It's more about setting in place policies that will have a reciprocal impact later down the road. It's a much more substantial imprint that he's trying to leave, I think. I think he sees a much larger picture, I guess that's what I'm coming down to. And it's that sort of Aquarian look that he has about the impact of what we're doing now. It's sort of like, even like Al Gore had that when it came to the climate. You have to have that longer view. You can't just look at today.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a beautiful day today, but we don't know what's happening. We have one of the world's one of the worst droughts in the history of the United States facing us, which is going to have an impact as the winter approaches, because food prices are going to go up, and just the mere impact of no water is huge, because it not only does it keep crops alive, but it also generates electricity, and there's a lot of things about it that are very disturbing.
Yeah, exactly. And so he has two sub-periods. He has two little stop-offs. And I'm going back to the midterm elections now with Mercury, because that was Saturn. And Saturn was basically what we've got this year in another area, which is concern. He had that concern with the Republicans taking over the House, saying, well, what did I do wrong here, And then he's got this little sub-period that really comes into play early, let's say, next spring, with Pluto. And Pluto is the idea of probity. It's which is a word for total honesty. So there's going to be a point where he's going to say, well, we have to take a really hard look at, like you're saying, our natural resources, water would be a great example. And then when he gets through with that particular area, then the year after that, or 2 years after that, he's going to be able to look at another opportunity and add some zest to the country. That's Jupiter. Jupiter is zest with a square, another square coming in, and then finally, or not finally, but in between that, a little period where he can step off the train for a little bit with a trine and Venus, and Venus is, okay, we'll have a realization about the way things are just before the end of my term in office.
Yeah,
so
and I think that that probity is a great word, because it really does speak to him as a person. He's not sort of one who is into self-aggrandizement, I don't think, in much the way. I don't think he's a power-hungry person. I really do believe he sees a challenge and he sees a solution. And yes. I don't get that same impression from a person who's driven by profit. And I don't see the same. I don't see the same thing. And it's not just about business. We do have to have business in the world to work, yes, but we also have to have diplomatic relations. And what does Mitt Romney have in the way of diplomatic stuff at all? He's nothing but I just don't see it. I don't want to get into my personal opinion. But
on the timetable, all his challenges came. They either come very early in his life when he's an adolescent, or they come later in life, and when he gets elderly.
Yeah.
There's not much
well,
going on.
It's an interesting topic. Unfortunately, we're out of time. My guest today has been Michael Elliot of the Sabian Assembly. We've been talking about sort of the gyroscope, the Cosmic Gyroscope, which is sort of the way cycles and seasons and circles begin to impact us, and repetitive cycles and all that coming around. And so it's been a fascinating discussion. We'll have to get you back on. Obviously, an hour is too short a period of time to talk about these great topics, but hopefully we'll get you on, or perhaps we'll have a whole show dedicated to you and what you guys are doing at some point in time. But anyway, I want to thank you for coming on today. We do have to sign off. The producer's giving me the nod, so I got to run. But stay tuned for the next show, and as always, thank you for listening and tuning in next week. Michael, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you very much. This has been a wonderful hour.
Good, very good. We'll talk to you all next week, folks. Thanks.
Okay.
You've been listening to Turning of the Wheel with your host, Chris Flisher. To schedule a reading with me or to order artwork, you may visit my website at www.chrisflisher.com. That's www.chrisflisher.com. Or email me, and you can call me at 978-264-0668. Thank you. And as always, be open to possibilities.
Bye.